Last time on Australia Rediscovered with Ricko.
I'm on my way to one of the most interesting pubs in all of Queensland. You know which one I'm talking about? Gully Pub. In the 1960s, famous artists like Russell Drysdale and Clifton Pugh would come to the outback for weeks at a time, and they'd use the family hotel right here as their base. Where I'm heading next is also a bit of a hub for movies and TV commercials and TV shows. I'm talking about the little outback town of Silverton. Today, the region that we're travelling to is famous for the Wollombi Tavern and Dr. Jerd's Jungle Juice and all the good stuff that goes along with the pub. However, back in the day, it was also famous for being a part of the road that split off between Maitland, Broke and Sydney. Australia. A land of extremes. And the stories of those who discovered the secrets of the Australian continent and made this land great are worth telling. So join me as I recount and retrace the footsteps of Australia's greatest stories. On Australia Rediscovered with Ricko. Australia's history is full of stories of heartbreak, triumph, tragedy, and you know what? I reckon this tree here, the dig tree, sums that all up perfectly.
Don't wait for me, honey.
This episode, we're going to be visiting some great outback towns, some outback pubs, and we're going to be looking at the stories surrounding them. The pubs I'll be visiting this week all share a common story. Their connection to the tragic end of one of Australia's most well-known exploration journeys.
And I know exactly what I'm looking for.
I'm starting my trek in the far western New South Wales town of Broken Hill, heading first to the small settlement of Menindee. Then I'll be following the dog fence north into Queensland to visit one of my all-time favourite outback pubs, and I'll end my journey in the South Australian town of Inaminka, near where both Burke and Wills spent their last days. The run out of the major town of Broken Hill to the little outpost of Menindee on the banks of the Darling River. It's a pretty easy run these days in the four-wheel drive. It's about an hour's drive, but if you look around, there's still some pretty harsh and barren country that you've got to travel through. And imagine back in the day, the blokes, the explorers who came out this way, they'd have had to walk this. Tell you what, glad I got the 4B. I've been fascinated by the Burke and Wills expedition for as long as I can remember. But how did such a well-planned expedition end in such tragic circumstances? That's a story I'm keen to find out a little bit more about. I've been to Menindee plenty of times, but I've never actually been to the pub that played such a major role in the story of Burke and Wills' trek north. Cheers, mate. By 1860, the golden age of exploration in Australia had well and truly begun, and Menindee had become a very important outpost. And it was also in 1860 that the Paynes Hotel, which we know today as the Maidens, had opened. When the expedition party left Melbourne on the 20th of August 1860, to much fanfare and excitement, there was profound hope that the unknown centre of Australia would finally be unlocked and that a suitable route north to the top of the continent would be found. The most well-equipped exploration party ever, Burke and his entourage had only made it a short way from Melbourne when the first cracks began to appear in his plans. Of course, we're all familiar with the tale of Burke and Wills, and the way they tell the story, you'd be forgiven for thinking they were the only blokes on the expedition, but of course, that's not true. Now, one thing that did set the expedition apart from all of the others that went before it was the inclusion of what were very exotic at the time and very expensive camels. Now, there was one bloke who was in the party who was charged with looking after these very expensive camels. His name was George Landells. However, he had a bit of a blue with Burke and chuffed off south back to Melbourne. William Wills, the party's navigator and surveyor, was appointed Burke's deputy. the diminished party arrived in Menindee on the 14th of October and Burke made the Paynes Hotel his base, while the party set up camp at Lake Pamamaru. Perhaps it was the many ales served by the publican at the hotel, or Burke's inexperience. Either way, Burke made the fateful decision to split the party, leaving most of the men in the stores as a base camp on Lake Pamamaru, while he, Wills and 5 other men, including Afghan camel driver Dost Mohammed, and a small part of the stores left after just 5 days at Menindee to head north. Their destination was Cooper's Creek, a permanent watercourse first discovered by Charles Sturt 15 years earlier. Sadly, this ill-fated decision would ultimately end in tragedy.